Welcome back, Chappelle. Welcome back to your Flip Classroom and our continuing discussion of our brand new unit, Napoleon before and after his empire, which basically this unit is just like a comprehensive overview of what's going on in the 1800s after Napoleon takes over France, right? So we are right now, though, midway through this whole process, just chatting it up about Napoleon Bonaparte, the man, the myth, the legend, right? So the big thing about it, though, as well, we're also talking about Napoleon Bonaparte and how his actual original name was Napoleone Bonaparte, and we also talked about how he was originally Corsican today in class and his relationship with his dad. Now he's going to end up going to military school, and how bullies will be the thing that sends him down the path of taking over the entire continent of Europe. That's why you shouldn't pick on people, y'all, because they might end up becoming dictators one day and taking over the entire continent of Europe. So when we're looking at this whole thing, though, we left off in class talking about Napoleon's growing reputation, right? We left off about how he is earning acclaim, he is earning fame, and he is earning a lot of clout right now because he is entering into the military when the revolution is going on. Well, he actually entered into the military about 4 years before the revolution started. But when the revolution began, he actually did support it, right? Now, we talked about today in C period and stuff like that, right? Kids came in all geared up, ready to go, attacking the new quarter. I like it, C period. Keep your game up. Now, the big thing about it, though, when we're looking at it, you have to understand, there's a lot of idiosyncrasies of this, right? Like, if you actually talk about this with your dad or something like that, who's a huge history buff, they might actually come back with actually, Napoleon supported Corsican independence before he supported the revolution and stuff like that. And he's right. He actually is correct. He actually did go to Corsica for a little while and supported the independence of the island against the French. But eventually, he looks at the French Revolution, he's like, that's the way to go, right? I'm better off with France in supporting the revolution than being against it. And he actually joined the Jacobin Club, which is the same club that Maximilian Robespierre, Georges Danton, and Jean-Paul Marat are in, right? Y'all remember Jean-Paul Marat? There he is, stabbed to death in his bathtub on my wall right there. So, that big guy and stuff like that. Well, he actually wasn't that big. He was kind of short and, a little bit shrivelly and also had, alligator skin. But the thing about it, though, is when we're looking at it, he supported those guys, right? He supported that kind of violent element of the revolution, supported the idea of making it at any cost necessary to take over as much of the government and get back the things for the people that he wanted. Well, a big thing that's also going to happen, as we know, is that in 1789 is when the revolution begins. That was a liberal part of the revolution, right? Marquis de Lafayette was in charge of the National Guard. You've got the bourgeois leading a very big thing. But then we get into that radical phase of the revolution around 1793, right? In 1793, that's when the Committee of Public Safety comes to power after the execution of Louis XVI. Well, a big event happened in Napoleon's life as well in 1793, while Maximilian Robespierre was in charge with Georges Danton and Jean-Paul Marat, right? The Committee of Public Safety is ruling over France, and the big thing about it is they're running that thing known as the Reign of Terror, right? Well, during the Reign of Terror, the point of all these executions and all these, large-scale executions where they're giving toy guillotines to kids to play with in the crowd and stuff like that, and women are knitting and watching people lose their heads, you know what I mean? When all that's going on, the point of that was to discourage French people from going against the revolution, from becoming what is known as counter-revolutionaries. So, the big thing is, that means that there are counter-revolutionaries out there. And one famous group of counter-revolutionaries was a small city in the south of France known as, let me get called back up on my slide, Toulon, right? So, see this little city right here? Toulon. So, literally what ended up happening was a small city in the south of France known as Toulon ended up breaking away and started trading with the British, which is a dastardly thing you don't do during the middle of the French Revolution. Maximilian Robespierre is furious about this. Georges Danton is furious about this. Maximilian Robespierre's own brother is furious about this, Augustin Robespierre. And so they send in a large military that Napoleon is involved with, that he's only a lieutenant of at this point in time. They send them in to go siege that city, to bring it under the thumb of the Committee of Public Safety, and to show people why you don't go against the Committee of Public Safety during the Reign of Terror, right? So they send him in, and during this siege process, Napoleon rolls up to the battle, rolls up to the city of Toulon, which has been fortified by British troops and things like that, and they are protecting this small southern French city and all these counter-revolutionaries. And when he gets there, he reports to the commanding officer. And the commanding officer, before the revolution started, was a painter, right? Which doesn't sound like very much of a military man. Well, the thing about it is, in the long run, a lot of the military guys, a lot of sword nobles like the Marquis de Lafayette, by this point have been running out of France because they don't want to be executed, right? The Marquis de Lafayette willingly got arrested in Austria. Was like, look, I ain't doing this anymore. I want to play this game. Get me out of here, right? So the thing about it, though, is that when he rises up there, that means that he's realizing something in for a moment. He's like, a lot of y'all are not very well-trained officers, but I am one. And so he uses this as a fulcrum point, as a turning point in his career. He sieges Toulon, takes it over, uses his cannon fire and his very, very genius military tactics, and he beats back the British, which is not something that happens very often. British, they don't lose battles, but this young upstart lieutenant has just beaten them back, right? Which is going to earn the respect of the Committee of Public Safety and Maximilian Robespierre, and they're going to promote him to general at the age of 28, which is absolutely bananas, right? Maximilian Robespierre looks upon Napoleon as one of the good ones, right? And he's like, that right there is the image of France. But then, whoa, twist! Robespierre's going to die, right? But then Robespierre dies about a year later, right? Less than a year later, actually, about 8 months later. He dies, and because during the Thermidorian reaction, he gets shot in the face. We don't know who shot him in the face. He might have shot himself in the face. That other guy might have shot him in the face. But what ends up going down is Maximilian Robespierre dies, and the Reign of Terror comes to an end in 1794. Well, who takes over after that? As Kaylee Dublin said so eloquently today in class, the Directory. The Directory takes over immediately after that. The Directory is a 5-man executive branch, and they have a legislative body underneath them called the Council of 500 that you don't need to know about, but it's still really interesting. So the thing about it, though, when we're looking at it is, they don't trust Napoleon. Why don't they trust this man who has been, rising up through the French ranks? It's because Maximilian Robespierre liked him, right? So the Directory doesn't feel that they can trust him. So they actually have Napoleon arrested and questioned, being like, are you going to plan to overthrow us and stuff like that? And Napoleon said, I was just following orders. I was doing what I was told for the glory of France. This had nothing to do with the growth of Robespierre. This had everything to do with the revolution itself. And so they put him under house arrest for a few weeks and stuff like that. And they end up releasing him, but Napoleon's frustrated because he's like, I had the biggest thing happen to me. I became general at the age of 28. And now I'm stuck in Paris doing nothing and pushing papers and stuff like that while the boring old Directory decides what they want to do with me, right? Well, then one day, in 13, because they have a weird new calendar and stuff like that, also known as year 2. So what ends up, or actually this isn't year 2 by then, it's like year 5. So looking at the whole thing though, is a crazy thing goes down. So this building right here is where the Directory used to meet, right? You see this very, very large building right here, okay? This very big, large meeting hall and stuff like that is where the Directory and the Council of 500 used to meet with one another, right? And decide what direction the revolution was going to go in. Well, one day, a mob of sans-culottes members show up out front of it, demanding the heads of the Directory members, demanding the death of the Council of 500, and demanding to take back this element of, puny non-violence, and they want to go back to what it was like during the Reign of Terror, right? They want somebody like Maximilian Robespierre back in charge, and these sans-culottes members, those without-pants poor people that are angry and rioting, decide that they're going to go bust those doors down and take the Directory over. Well, not under Napoleon's watch. Napoleon is an opportunist. How many of y'all have a friend that's an opportunist, right? They're very cunning and they're manipulative and stuff like that. And they know when to take advantage of certain situations, right? You got to know these things. It's a very, very big part of your life is knowing when to take advantage of a situation for your own personal growth, right? So the thing about it is, Napoleon saw this opportunity. You mean that a bunch of angry poor people are about to destroy the government that doesn't like me? What if I destroy the angry poor people? Then that government will like me. And that's what he did. He actually rolled up to this engagement, and the event is known as a whiff of grape shot. And there is Napoleon right there, firing cannons into the sans-culottes members and at the rioters, right? And as you can see, bodies are strode about the stairs and things like that. Why did he do this? To earn the trust of the Directory, right? He shoots them with cannon fire in the form of grape shot. Now, I don't know if any of y'all have ever shot a shotgun before, but shotgun bullets are not like regular ones, right? Not a single thing comes out. Actually, it sprays in a large direction because there's pellets inside of the actual cartridge, right? So grape shot is a lot like that, but it can be shot out of a cannon, right? So it's like very tiny little cannonballs that fly in all these different directions. And it's also sometimes used to disperse crowds and stuff like that. Well, at this point in time, in the 1700s, it was used to do that. So not anymore. That's pretty violent. So the thing about it, though, in general, is he shot it at them to try and show the Directory that he would protect them if they actually needed him to. And the reason why it's called a whiff of grape shot, which sounds kind of like a very soft event and stuff like that, which is actually really, really intense. A lot of historians actually argue that this demonstrates Napoleon's violent streak and things like that. Another historian called it a whiff of grape shot because he was a Napoleon supporter, right? Because he's like, oh, it's just a whiff. It's just a whiff. But now he has the trust of the Directory, and he is back to being Napoleon the general, right? And so he decides that at this moment, that with the Directory's trust and with a new army underneath his command, he wants to go against his biggest rival that he's ever known. And he wants to go out there, he wants to slap around those silly British, right? He wants to go after the British, and he wants to destroy them at any means necessary. He hates the British with a fury, and he wants to bring them down. But why? Why does Napoleon dislike the British so much? I understand that nobody liked the British except for the British at this point, but why does he dislike them, so fervently? A lot of it has to do with two things. One, The British, write this down, the British were very strong at this point, right? Their military, was based in their navy. Their naval fleet was huge. They had colonies everywhere, and they were making tons and tons and tons of money with this thing called the Industrial Revolution that's going on back at their house. But we'll talk about that a little bit later on in this unit, okay? But the British are making tons of money right now, and their empire is growing. He doesn't like that because he's a French general, and he believes in France, and he believes in the nationalism of France, and he wants France to be better than the British. So he doesn't like that, right? He doesn't like that there's a power out there that's competing with them. The other reason why he doesn't like them is because they used to do a lot of negative political cartoons about him, right? They used to make fun of him all the time in their newspapers and in their magazines and in their pamphlets and stuff like that. They would make him look like a short little villain and stuff like that. They called him the little general all the time and made fun of his stature or whatever. And they also made him look like a violent monster. They said like, oh, the blood of the innocents are on his blades and stuff like that. And they would do these pictures of him standing on like barrels to try and be bigger than the crowd, like shooting innocent people at Toulon and stuff like that. So he doesn't like that either, right? Because they're not only big and powerful, but they're also making fun of him, right? So he decides to invade Egypt. Wait, what? Why? A lot of y'all, I know right now, I got some hands up in the air, and I can just see in my mind's eye, like Ava Bodine going, or Emma Alvarado being like, well, but why? But why Egypt? Why would you go there? That's not Britain. So it's not like they're next to the pyramids going, oh, tip-top, cheerio, look at the big triangle. They're not doing that, right? So the big thing about it that you have to understand is why Egypt, right? Well, the reason why they decided to invade Egypt is because it's the halfway point between Great Britain and India. Some of you are like, no, it's not. You have to go around Africa. No, not if you know how to use the geography correctly, right? So if you look at a world map of Egypt, right, including Britain and India on the other side, the British realized that it would be making way more sense to actually leave Great Britain, go through the Strait of Gibraltar, which we'll draw this up on a map tomorrow and stuff like that, land in Egypt, move their products over land just for a few miles, get it into the Suez, and then go all the rest of the way to India, cutting that trip in half instead of going around Africa. Well, Napoleon comes up with the bright idea, well, if I invade Egypt, I'll cut them off at that halfway mark, and instead of attacking them physically, I'll attack their wallet, right? I'll come after their trade goods and stuff like that. I'll come after all the fact that they are literally the place that everybody goes to get cotton textiles and luxury goods from Asia and stuff like that. So he wants to cut them out of the game, and he wants to take away their trade products, right? It's a very genius thing when you think about it. He had several huge victories in this early engagement, those including the Battle of the Pyramids, Battle of Cairo, several other things like that, against combined British and Ottoman forces, which is huge for his actual military development. But here's the thing. Those are battles on land. Something that we need to understand before we go any further is that Napoleon could beat just about any army as long as they were on the land, right? But it's when naval battles came into play is when he really began to struggle, right? The invasion of Egypt ultimately, though, was a failure because he lost the biggest battle out of them all, the Battle of the Nile, which was a huge naval battle that happened at the mouth of the Nile Delta, right? Now, the thing about it is when we're looking at these different pictures and stuff like that, as you can see, like with this one right here, these are Napoleon's forces at the Battle of the Pyramids, taking out a huge Ottoman force and stuff like that and winning in a really big way. The thing about it is he just can't seem to get off that horse and get into a boat and win a battle, right? And the guy that defeats him is a very, very famous individual by the name of Admiral Horatio Nelson. This man right here is the one man that Napoleon could never defeat in battle. He just couldn't do it. He just every single time. It's like his kryptonite, right? It's literally like Napoleon's kryptonite. Every time he came up on him, he was just like, nope, not today, and slap, and he would just send Napoleon back. Now, since he's an admiral, that means he's a naval commander, right? And so the thing about Admiral Horatio Nelson, too, is it's so funny, because this guy beat Napoleon one after another, after another, after another, after another time, all the time, and he literally was so crippled, right? So it's just an interesting little story about Admiral Horatio Nelson, is that he was a fantastic naval admiral, right? Just in general, strategist, all of the things, right? Very, very good at fighting and stuff like that. The interesting thing about him, though, is he was missing several parts of his body, right? So first and foremost, he's blind in one of his eyes, right? It doesn't look like he is because he's got a patch on right here, but this eye right here, his left eye, he can't see doodly squat out of it, right? Because he actually got hit by a lot of sand in his eye and stuff like that when a bullet hit like a sandbag in front of him, sprayed sand into his eye, and scratched his cornea so badly that he couldn't see through it anymore, and he was blind in it, right? But they asked him, well, why don't you wear a patch or something like that? He was like, because patches are unbecoming and I don't want to look like that. It's gross. And they actually passed a candle in front of it to make sure he couldn't see. And at the Battle of the Nile, Because of him, there's a very famous phrase named after him. For the dads that are possibly listening to this flip right now, you'll like this a lot. There's a famous phrase called turning a blind eye to something. It's because at the Battle of the Nile, when the British were flagging down Admiral Nelson, being like, no, turn back, we don't want to lose against this French Navy. He literally turned his blind eye to them so he could say that he didn't see them, right? And he went and attacked like Napoleon's forces anyway, and he ended up winning the entire battle, right? So he's like, oh, sorry, I couldn't see you. You were on my blind eye side, right? So now, but yeah, couldn't see Doodly Squad out of that eye. Also, he's missing an arm. He's literally missing an arm right here. As you can see, his sleeve is pinned to his shirt because he actually got a musket ball to the actual top side of his arm, and it shattered the entire bone in there, and they had to amputate it off. So he's blind in one eye, and he actually is missing an arm. And at one point in another battle, he actually got shrapnel to the scalp, and it ripped off a big chunk of his hair and stuff like that, and dangled in front of his eye. Apparently, every single time before he when he got hurt and stuff like that in battle, he would always be like, "Tell my wife I love her," and he would just scream that and stuff like that, even though he was cheating on her with this lady named Lady Hamilton. But that's neither here nor there. So looking at this other thing though as well, it's a very famous item was also discovered in Egypt by Napoleon's forces. This thing known as the Rosetta Stone. And we'll talk about that a little bit more when we actually talk about it in class. But just write down the Rosetta Stone, okay? Rosettastone, right? We'll talk about it a little bit. But the Napoleon's forces actually discovered it. It's a really, really big deal, all right? So what's going to happen, though, is because Napoleon loses the Battle of the Nile against this one-arm, one-eye, flying purple people eater named Admiral Horatio Nelson, he abandons his armies, and he returns to France to a hero's welcome. Wait, what? Who returns to France to a hero's welcome after all that? This seems a little bit ridiculous. Well, Napoleon is going to use it regardless, okay? He's going to seize the power, and he's going to actually overthrow the government in 1799, in this thing known as the coup d'etat of 1799. And what a coup d'etat is a sudden seizure or overthrow of power, and the government, think of it as a revolution in a day, right? So, but we're going to actually stop and cut it right there. So you have a nice short flip going into your first lesson, go after your first, lesson of the quarter and stuff, and we'll pick up right here in our next class. We'll talk about how Napoleon's going to grow his influence. We're also going to talk about his 3 big mistakes, right? And why you just don't invade Russia. Man, just don't invade Russia. But we'll talk about that soon. Y'all have a good one.